Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Molly Rogers. I'm the Associate Director of the Center for the Humanities at New York University. The center's role at NYU is to foster collaboration across the university and at all of our global sites, and to support faculty and graduate students in their work in the humanities. Part of what we do are host events, such as today's event, and we also fund faculty and students for doing their research. Today's event, which is a really exciting event for us, it's called Doing the Work Together, Exploring Community University Partnerships, Centering Social Justice and Equity with New City Kids. We are delighted to host this event, which will explore ways that community organizations and university partners like us can collaborate, working together towards socially just aims in public humanities spaces. The event was organized by Dr. Karis Jones, who is with us today. She was a public humanities fellow with the Center for the Humanities this past year, funded by Humanities New York, which is a consortium of universities in New York State who support teaching and research in the humanities. For this event, we're going to explore ways that community organizations, New City Kids in particular today, and university partners, NYU is our example, can collaborate, working together towards socially just aims. The panel will feature Karis in conversation with partners from New City Kids. Today we have here Josh Echeverria, Sue Kim, and Genis Espinal. The discussion will address topics such as how Karis, as the university partner, entered the community organization in a relational way, and how the project that she brought to New City Kids, how the goals were negotiated collaboratively between the university partner and the community organization, and how the partnership adapted to address the emerging youth and organizational needs during the COVID-19 pandemic. Karis will give us all a short introduction to her work with New City Kids, after which we will show you a short video about the organization, and then we'll hear from Josh, Sue, and Genis. And then we also want to hear from you, our audience. But now let me hand things over to Karis, who is going to introduce her project and her work with New City Kids. Thank you, Karis.
Thank you. So I'm going to start off telling you a little bit about how I started a relationship with New City Kids, and then I'll tell you about my work and then how my work played out in this collaboration. So I started volunteering for New City Kids in 2016 when I transitioned from teaching full-time to being a graduate student in the teaching and learning department at NYU. I care a lot about working with youth, and so I didn't want to lose that in graduate school. And I had learned about New City Kids at a community listening session that was sponsored by our local church plant. So New City Kids has a model where youth in the community are supported by teens who are supported by adult staff and community volunteers. And so I started as a community volunteer. And for several years, I helped with the after-school teen tutoring, working with students who needed extra homework help in the evening. And in 2018, I approached New City Kids to ask if I could start a small research project with some of the teens that I was working with. And New City Kids was very supportive of this project and allowed me to interview several of the teens about their literacy practices over the course of the semester, which later actually influenced my dissertation topic. And I was able to work with these teens and also invite them to present their work at local as well as national English educational conferences. We presented at the SUNY Graduate Center in Syracuse and even at the National Council for Teachers of English in Baltimore. And I also helped them add to this work to their resumes and supported their college applications and SAT prep. After that small project, I was interested in continuing to work with New City Kids. So pre-pandemic, I met with some of the staff to brainstorm ways that I could help. And they supported my application for this public humanities grant. And so let me tell you a little bit about the project that I proposed, and then we'll talk more about how it changed over the course of this year. So my ongoing research is about restructuring literacy education, especially in classroom contexts. In my work, I examine how traditional academic contexts can be silencing and deadening to underserved students' literacy practices, especially due to factors like a focus on individual learning and taking up a banking model of education where learning is conceptualized as depositing inside of students' heads, a privileging of written texts, positioning dialects other than white mainstream English or academic language as inappropriate, culturally biased language of instruction, excessive focus on form, and writing in limited audiences for inauthentic or institutional purposes. So instead, my work addresses these issues by reconceptualizing literacy education through a culturally relevant lens where we assume that youth literacy practices are already present. And so I look a lot at fandom practices and how youth are already engaging in discourses and practices, studying a central text that they love with a broad definition of text. So this could be movies or graphic novels or a band, or a webcomic, just a podcast, anything that people are talking about becomes a text for discussion. And so UCD Kids led me to my dissertation topic, and then this partnership allowed me to apply and develop some of my dissertation findings. So something that I thought about when I was working on this was this idea of equity trails that we think about in community design. So participants may have different conceptions of equity, which may be in conflict. And so thinking about following consequences of whose version of equity is privileged. Students are engaged with consequential meaning making across spaces, not just in one space, but in multiple spaces. So designs need to make room for that. And I often think about, instead of seeing out of school learning as a bridge to academic learning, reconceptualizing learning as navigating across different literacies discourses. And school spaces do not often privilege this type of meaning making, but community and nonprofit spaces are much more open to it. And then finally, institutional structures can dampen flows of passion and create barriers. And so it was really important in this partnership to think about following youth passions. So during the last year, I worked with Josh with Families for Literacy to design and support various iterations of their online reading program. I worked with ESL teens who are developing curriculum for the youth in the program. I worked with Sue and the teens to put together a fall life skills class on meaningful writing that Genis participated in, and it extended into a spring meaningful writing club that was suggested by Genis. I interviewed teens about their literacy practices, and I worked with them on their college essays through the college readiness support staff, which led me to give a cross-site PD for New City Kids staff on supporting youth writing. And I was also part of Jersey City Together, which is a local grassroots faith-based advocacy organization. And they were really interested in connecting with New City Kids to listen to underserved parent groups and to hear from teen ambassadors at their action events. So I was able to help facilitate those connections this year through Josh and Families for Literacy. I also received a small seed grant to support Families for Literacy's end of year literacy celebration, which allowed us to purchase new culturally relevant texts for the students and to sponsor a meaningful writing contest for youth, co-designed and judged by teens. So that's a kind of overarching description of the project. And Molly, I think we have a video to teach people a little more about New City Kids.
We do. Thank you for that overview. Let me share my screen with you all now so I can play this video.
Urban poverty is putting a generation of youth at risk. Violence, drugs, lack of higher education, and abuses of all kinds are rampant in poor urban areas. Across the U.S., children from 1st to 12th grade face great obstacles every day. Living in poverty puts even the brightest children at risk. Children who are not in after-school programming are 50% more likely to experiment with drugs and alcohol. Ultimately, only 9% of low-income students graduate college by 24. but there is hope. New City Kids breaks the cycle of poverty. Youth are challenged to see themselves as leaders and change makers, charting a new path both for themselves and for those who look up to them. New City Kids creates a community like no other through a network of after-school programs in urban communities. These centers serve children from 1st to 8th grade, fostering an environment where young people are loved, seen not as the problem, but the solution. We hire local high school students to teach music and to tutor younger children after school. We train our students, mentor them, tutor them, and pray for them every day. The results amaze everyone. Our teens find themselves surrounded by loving mentors in a safe and creative environment, and they flourish. Their grades improve, they gain self-confidence and joy. This new community, filled with music and fun, creates a window to a brighter future. New City Kids impacts high school students profoundly. Almost every senior we've employed has graduated high school, and New City Kids alumni are 10 times more likely to graduate college by the age of 24 than the average low-income student. New City Kids is changing lives, families, and communities. Join us today. Let's empower a generation of youth to break the cycle of poverty and make their cities new.
Fantastic. So there we have, terrific film, terrific organization. So Karis has told us a bit about herself and her work and her goals in that work. And we just learned a little bit about New City Kids. We're now going to meet our panelists, and we're going to start with Josh Echeverria. Can you tell us a little bit about tell us what you do. Tell us who you are and what you do, and then we'll talk about your involvement with Karis's work.
Great. Thank you so much, Molly. And thank you everyone for being here. Again, my name is Josh Echeverria. I am the director of a program called Families for Literacy, which is a program that is led by New City Kids, but it is actually a collaborative of 3 other organizations in Jersey City. One is actually a local university, and 2 is 2 other nonprofits. And we work together to really serve the families of New City Kids and other families in the community, which providing holistic programming and by supporting adult and child well-being through programs that promote English language proficiency, sustainable employment, and children academic achievements. And so we serve only immigrant families. We've seen that we have a very diverse immigrant population in Jersey City. I think Jersey City is known to be one of the most diverse cities in America. And so we've seen that one of the needs for this community is literacy encouragement for children, English proficiency for parents, and also helping families attain their life goals and surrounding them with services from the community. So I've been working out there for 4 years. And for this specific project, I've worked with Karis around the online reading program, where we pivoted all of our services with our families from in-person to online, as you could only imagine, because of the pandemic this year. And this online reading program was brand new, starting from the summer and on till now ending in the spring. And I look forward to talking more about that. But yeah, so that's a little bit about myself and my involvement with Karis and also New City Kids.
Fantastic. Thank you, Josh. Sue, I'm going to ask you now to tell us a little bit about yourself, your involvement with New City Kids, and then how you came to know Karis.
Yeah, great to speak with everyone. Can everyone hear me well? Just give me a thumbs up. Perfect. All right. Well, yeah, my name is Sue, and I have been on staff with New City Kids for 5.5 years now. It's been my pleasure to work in different capacities. Currently, I serve as the Teen Program Director, meaning I put in a little bit of work, but mainly Genis and the 70 other teens that work for New City Kids, they run the show. One of our core values at New City Kids is trusting teens with leadership. where often youth are kind of seen as, what do we do with them, or what kind of program can we put them in? Instead, we kind of flip the model on its head, and we're just like, no, youth are the answer. So my job is to create a constructive program where our teens can be gainfully employed at New City Kids, learn great workforce readiness skills that will not just equip them to work here, but also beyond New City. And then we support them holistically by working with them academically in the ways that Karis mentioned, of like supporting through tutoring. I lead an SAT class with them. We do college advising. We do a college tour for them. We do musical development where they get to learn how to play an instrument, master that instrument, and then teach that instrument to younger kids. And then we also do leadership development where teens like Genis, who are originally hired just as an entry-level teen life intern, but then once they demonstrate their skills in leadership and taking initiative and working with other teens, they're elevated to a new role called an assistant team leader or a team leader, where they get to have extra responsibility and ownership of the program. So my job is to really create the infrastructure so that our teens can be the highlight of our program, and they definitely are, and also to create fun opportunities for them to find community here. So I'm sure Genis can share you a few examples, but even just last week, we hosted a glow in the dark night where the teens can come into our building. After a year and a half of the pandemic, they were able to hang out, have fun, fellowship, eat, and just have a time where they can just be teens and not always be the employees we rely on. So that is my kind of job at New City. And the way I've got to know Karis originally was she was probably one of the first volunteer tutors that I worked with. And she came in, helped our teens with reading and writing. And then her husband actually helped the teens more with the science and the math part. So they're very good yin and yang in helping our teens. So just meeting her through that and then learning her interest for the community and obviously for education, we were able to work together to also pick the right teens that can help in her research projects that also had a similar passion for it. Like none of it had to be forced. It was all integrated. It meshed well. So that's why we were so thankful to be able to work with Karis in that way. And I will be happy to address any more questions later about the New City Kids program, the teen program, and just all that we do. But great to meet all of you.
Wonderful, thank you. Great introduction, and I love your remark about flipping the model, which it seems to me a lot of this is about flipping the model, and Karis's work as well. So I'm going to steal that. I'm going to borrow that. I'm going to take that forward. So thank you for that. So Genis, we want to hear from you now. First of all, can you tell me what school you go to and what grade you're in?
All right, so my name is Genis. Hi. I go to Lincoln High School and I'm in the 11th grade.
Okay. So you're coming out of the 11th grade and going into 12th grade, correct? Yeah?
Yes.
Terrific. And I understand you started a writing club. That's what Karis said a moment ago. Is that correct?
Yes. Basically we did this thing in New City, which is like a life skill. So Karis basically partnered up with us and we did like a meaningful writing life skill where we would write like different pieces, like poetry or fiction, and overall like expand our literacy skills. So then a few of us really decided that we liked writing a lot more than we didn't know that we did. So we wanted to start like a club where we could just come in on Thursdays and just write out some pieces, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, poetry, whatever it was. So we took the time like around 6 p.m. I believe it was, and we would just write pieces and then share it within the club.
Fantastic. So you started that.
Well, yeah, we all collaborated on it.
Yeah, share the credit.
She's being modest. She's being modest, but Genis was, yes, she was in charge of it. Yes.
She was instrumental, but she's being very modest and very, very kind and sharing her credit. That's great. Is there anything else you want to tell us just now to get us started about your collaboration with Karis, about her involvement at your school?
Definitely, she's really helped a lot. Like I didn't know that writing was a stress reliever for me until we did our meaningful life skill. So she really helped a lot with us working on like our writing pieces, and even if we had things outside of the life skill, she would help us with like applications and stuff like that. So she's been really helpful overall, especially when it came to like certain opportunities. We did a thing for public school funding as well, so she helped me put a piece together to talk about my own experience as well.
Terrific. Fantastic. That's a great introduction. Thank you very much, Genis. So Karis, I'm gonna hand it back to you, and I want to hear about sort of the project you started, what you kind of pitched to New City Kids, and then what the reality was, what happened. And I know that there was this small little incident called a pandemic that kind of happened in the middle of all that. But community partnerships change anyway, so there would have been some adjustment, I'm sure, anyway. But what was your vision? Tell us what you brought to New City Kids.
Yeah. So when I first approached New City Kids with the project, something that I said was I was really interested in equitable and culturally relevant literacy development and education, and supporting teens with that. And something that I had seen in my tutoring and in the interviews that I was doing with students was that there was this big divide between their academic writing and literacies and their fandom literacies, or literacies that they were engaging outside of school. And it's not that these things have to be separate, but that like teens would talk about like, oh, you know, like, I don't bring this into a school space because people look down on this, or like, oh, you know, like this doesn't measure up, like the things that I read on Wattpad don't measure up to like academic standards, so I'm like embarrassed to talk about it. And as I was working with the youth researchers, we were really thinking about like, like what is making these binaries, and how can we break them down so that literacy is literacy, so that's not being kind of so that the rich literacy practices that they had weren't being cordoned off into a, well, we don't talk about this in academic spaces. You know, I was seeing all their assignments from school, and I knew that school assignments were just very focused just on particular sorts of writing assignments in particular sorts of discourses that didn't always line up with their home discourses, and could be kind of very oppressive or make them feel like they weren't good writers. And so when I was working with Josh and Sue and Genis to design these programs, I was always thinking about how can we make moving across spaces more fluid? How can New City Kids and all of these literacy programs be places where kids can bring their whole literacy selves to the table? So actually, I think that we were able to hold on to that all throughout all the program changes, because that's more of a design commitment than like a structural thing. So no matter how the program changed, that was something that we could hang on to.
And Karis, could I just add to that?
Please do.
Yeah. Obviously, the pandemic tested, you know, all of us in different ways, but I think because as New City Kids grew, and we've been in existence for 25 years now, but I think what we've learned how to do better is to not fall into temptation to mission drift. And because there's a lot of different opportunities that come our way, because I'm thankful that a lot of organizations want to partner, but in understanding who we are and what we're focused on and accomplishing and working with our young people, using them as the role models and the examples, and then how to support them in our 4 key areas, we knew that this was in alignment. How it works came out to be a little bit different, of course, with the pandemic and how we had to adapt, but the why and just the what we do, that had to stay the same. And because that was consistent with this opportunity through Karis, it made sense. So I just want to really echo that for us.
So your principles were aligned right from the start. So then kind of what shape that takes isn't really that important. Obviously, it is important to sort of execute the project effectively, but as long as you adhere to those principles, then you're on the right track. Is that accurate?
And Molly, I wanted to say that at the very beginning, we did actually have kind of a principle alignment conversation where we sat down and we talked about what we wanted to accomplish and where we were coming from. And I talked about my research interests, and I heard about the programs. And so that was very explicit in our partnership process. Just thinking about people who maybe be thinking about starting up university community partnerships, like we explicitly put those things on the table together.
Well, let me ask you this, and you know, Josh, Sue, Genis, Karis, anyone can jump in on this question. When you sit down at a table and start talking about these things, in my experience with sort of university community partnerships, it takes a while to find the same language. That you're coming from different disciplines. You have sort of different ways of speaking about your goals and your objectives. Did you find that you had to kind of work a little bit towards a common language, or was that just there? I mean, your goals were there. Clearly, you had a shared a vision, but did you find that you had to find a language in order to express that vision that the other organization would understand? Was that at all an issue for you guys?
So I can jump in on that one. So for with me and Karis, Families for Literacy has always been a program to encourage children on increasing their literacy through encouraging them to read on a monthly basis. We have like reading challenges every month where we track their reading all the time. But we wanted to really have something really effective, especially during the pandemic where kids are all indoors. We didn't have such a huge outreach or close interaction with them. And so when we created this online reading program, which was all done in Zoom, there was a lot of freedom really on creating this. And we had an idea of just having kids to read. But Karis came in and just really made it even made it better than what we could have ever have thought it to be. We're not a literacy organization. We encourage children on reading. We encourage them in increasing their academics. But partnering with Karis and bringing her expertise around literacy and around academics had really just pivoted us to a place where we were able to bring excellent programming around something that we weren't doing before. So like I had mentioned before, we didn't do an online reading program prior. We just thought that this was a need for our kids in our community, especially the immigrant children who already are suffering and struggling with reading. And could you ever imagine during the pandemic where they can go to school, they don't have really access to books. So what we did is subscribe every child to an online reading portal called Epic. And we were able to give children access to thousands and thousands of books. And we use that tool for the online reading program, but through Karis, really deliver it in a way that was equitable, it was effective, and really allowed children to really enjoy reading, but also practice skills of reading that maybe on our own we wouldn't have thought of, but Karis really came in and really just stepped up our game. So really, I think it's the openness of us and freedom that we provide in opening up for ideas for programming, especially in a time of unknown like the pandemic and not really knowing how to move forward, really allowed us to really catapult us to a way that we never thought we were going to get to.
Molly, something that I wanted to add to what Josh was saying, was that something that was so cool about partnering together was that the organization made space for me to work with the teens and like talk with them a lot about language, like to lead some professional development sessions. So we actually did have a lesson that I led that was all about literacy and like, what do you think literacy is, and how do you define it? And then I worked with the teens to try to expand that definition of literacy from just like reading and writing in like traditional schooly ways to like the social processes of literacy. And literacy is communication. Literacy is participating in larger discourse conversations. And the teens, I thought it was really great to see the teens like really take hold of that. And in their lessons, you could see that like they were drawing on Epic and they were drawing on the books and they were thinking about skills, but they were also thinking about communicating, engaging youth in their interests. Like a lot of superheroes kept coming into the literacy program. And that was because youth were interested in it. Like if youth brought in interests for video games like Among Us, the teens would like pick that up and they would work it into their lessons. So I was really appreciative that we had these professional development sessions where we could talk kind of theoretically about the language, and then you could see that like working itself out in the program.
That's a great idea, to sort of create a space to find that common language and then see what people are receptive to and what can grow. And it sounds, Karis, like you really just sort of presented a very broad interpretation of literacy, a very expansive a program, and that Josh, you just kind of jumped on it. Like this is going to be great. It's really going to work out for us. But wasn't all that before. That was before the pandemic. So what did the pandemic change? Yes, you moved to an online literacy program, which terrific idea. And I want to hear more from Genis about that in a minute. But I want to know what changed. Like what did the tools change only? It's just a matter of how you delivered the work you were doing, or did what happened when the pandemic hit?
So oh, go ahead, Sue.
Sue, go. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think to understand how we had to adapt, we have to understand what were we normally like in the beginning, like pre-pandemic. So in a regular season of Teen Life Internship and our after-school center model, where our teens are working in the after-school center, normally kids come into our after-school center, 1st through 8th graders, and they experience 2 different blocks. One block of like about a 45-minute time range, they receive homework help. So a tutor sits with about 5 or 6 kids at a tutoring table, and they just do homework support, which is great. And then in another block, they'll go to a classroom. Well, they'll learn how to play an instrument, like the keys, the bass, or the drums. Or if they're younger kids who aren't necessarily ready for music, they might be in a reading class or an ESL class for some of our sites that have students who have English as a second language. So they're placed into these classes, and they get to learn and have fun in these ways. But the thing is, once the pandemic hit, we couldn't run our traditional after school program, and we had to do majority of our programming online. And what the biggest shift was for us is that teens who came in, kind of like Genis and others, they came in as tutors. And when you're a tutor, you have to be just more prepared on the spot. You have to be ready to adapt to the homework that the kids have every single day. Whereas now we've placed them to not just be online reading teachers, but our other programs, they've had to be activity teachers, they've had to be dance teachers, they've had to be all these other teachers that you have to execute lesson plans, you have to execute collaboration with your co-teachers, you have to execute making sure you're following the curriculum, and learning all these new ways of how to be a teen life intern while also learning to be a classroom teacher, both in person and let alone online. Oh, that's hard for adults, let alone teens. And yet that was probably one of the biggest ways. And the way that we still kept consistent with our model, though, in line with what Karis was doing, was that on like Monday evenings, Karis would come in and she would make sure she troubleshoots with the teens and, hey, what worked well this past week? How can we improve? And then what can we add to the curriculum? And then the teens they would take leadership and ownership. They'd share their perspective and say, hey, this worked well. I think this would work better this time. And then, we all discussed it together. But then the teens had ultimate ownership, because by Friday evening at 5 p.m., they knew that they need to submit a lesson plan to us. If they didn't submit a lesson plan to us, they received accountability in the form of a write-up. And a lot of people think that, oh, why be so negative with teens? If anything, it's a great way of just saying, hey, we know the work, the high quality work that you can produce here, and it's in line with the adults' guidance, but really you guys are going to want to have the ownership of it. And they executed lesson plans. We comment them, we give them feedback. We said, you know what, it'd be better to have some clarity here. And because we did that, it still followed the model of, teens leading these things, but ultimately adults like Karis would guide them and provide them the framework and the structure to follow off of. So thankfully, it still worked out in that way, but there was a big pivot since a lot of our tutors had to now become teachers.
Right. So there's a very strong mentoring platform that sort of goes throughout the whole thing. And whether you're mentoring online or in person, it's still about mentoring, isn't it? Karis, did you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I was going to say that Josh and I in the FFL online reading program, from the summer to the spring, we went through 3 different design iterations of what the online reading program looked like. So in the beginning, I don't think we had teens involved at all, right, Josh? It was kind of like a community-based model where the kids would come onto a Zoom call and they would get split up into rooms with staff and volunteers. And we would just read to them. Like, we didn't have lessons. We didn't really have guiding questions, or like, we would just read, and it was just kind of about building relationships and kind of having these like positive experiences with literacy. So when the fall came, there was a shift in the programming, and maybe Josh, you can talk more about this, but they started to change the model so that teens were getting integrated, and teens were like leading the breakout rooms and teaching these lessons, like Sue said, and coming up with like ways to support the students that they were working with. And then in the spring, it became much more structured, where teens were planning, using unit plans to plan lessons and implement those lessons. And there were volunteers and staff all helping with that. And teens were like teaching skills to the students, like they would make videos and like lead interactive games for them. And so the model of the program shifted several times, and I think the teens took kind of more and more leadership, which, Josh, I don't know if they did that in previous versions, but I think that was new.
I think so too. Yeah, you're right. And just to say, actually, believe it or not, Karis, it was 4 times that we shifted, because it was,
Whoops.
it was the summertime, it was the fall, and the winter, and then the spring, where we had 4 different structures of the online reading. But absolutely, and Karis is right. Originally during the summertime, it was just a Families for Literacy, the program that I've led program. But then as New City Kids was trying to figure out what the fall and the rest of the year is going to look like, and trying to provide equitable, excellent programming, we decided to, at New City Kids, to adopt the online reading program that Families for Literacy led during the summer, and have it for all of the after school center sites. And so that's when we included the teenagers, the Teen Life interns into the programming. And Sue did an excellent job in leading the way with that, with the help of Karis as well. And we were able to really provide some excellent programming, and like Karis said in the beginning, it was just having kids being read with. We moved it over to having kids learn reading skills and practice their reading in these breakout rooms, and we were able to put them into different reading levels. The reading levels are similar to them, so they'll be able to read books that all of them are able to read together. And it was mostly led by the teenagers and adults as well. So it was very effective. I could you imagine kids, after being online all day in school, still coming to an online reading program? And believe it or not, they did. They absolutely did. In the winter, we actually had our highest attendance, where we had over 100 kids on 3 times a week come to our program. And they were just so excited, so filled with joy, learning to read better, and also to be around their fellow classmates as well. So it in many ways, it was very therapeutic, very healing for some of these kids. It broke isolation for many of them as well. I have a background in mental health counseling. I'm actually a licensed professional counselor in the state of New Jersey. So I've seen many of the kids who had struggled emotionally throughout this pandemic. So many of them have just been their feelings of anxious, anxiety, depression has been alleviated because being able to spend time with us, with the adult staff, with their kids, with the teens. They've just really had such an amazing time, and they came every single time. And now that we're ending, they're all very sad that we're finishing up. But it was has been really an amazing year. Yeah.
That's fantastic. It's so inspiring to hear, that everybody wants to read and come together, even if it means doing it online. That's really, really amazing. Genis, I want to hear from you about your experience. So you were a tutor, you were a reading tutor, is that right?
Yes, before COVID, I was a tutor at New City.
Okay, and then what happened after COVID? How you continued doing that, but it was a bit different?
Yeah, at first we did this thing called pods, which is basically like we were in person outside, and I was a active teacher, which was completely different from a tutor. So I had to adapt to that situation. But then
tell us what the difference is. What's the difference between being a tutor and being a teacher?
So a tutor, basically the kids just come in with their homework and you just help them on the spot with their homework. So even if you don't know about it, we would like search up videos with the kids so we could learn it as well and help them. But then being an active teacher, you have to plan lesson plans, teach the actual lesson to the kids, and making sure that they actually understand it instead of just like saying, oh yeah, I understand it, and then they don't understand it at all. So really just making sure that the kids understood what was being taught to them. So whether it was kickball or football or soccer, things like that is what we taught as an active teacher.
And so that's more responsibility. How did you feel about that? Was it a little bit intimidating at first?
Yeah, at first it was a little bit weird for me because I'm not really an active person. I don't really like doing all that. But with the help of, my fellow coworkers, we got to, plan together our lesson plans, and we also had some adult staff help us as well. So it was pretty easy to just get into the hang of things. So yeah, it wasn't that bad.
So you worked together. You weren't on your own. You were in a leadership role, but you had lots of support and advice and that helped. Yeah.
Definitely a lot of support.
Fantastic.
And Molly, can I add something really quick and then pass it back to Genis? Something that I thought that was really cool about shifting from the tutoring model to the teaching model is in a tutoring model, you really end up reifying a lot of things that are coming from school, right? Like if school sends an assignment home and you look at it and you're like, this assignment is terrible, and it's like reifying inequitable school structures, like your way of engaging in an equitable way is kind of like saying, well, this was a bad assignment, but I'm going to help you do it anyway. But if you're actually teaching a lesson, you can kind of reimagine what counts as literacy, what counts as like something worthwhile to learn, like what skills are important and what we're going to do with them. So I thought that like the teens getting to plan their own lessons was just like a really cool equity space, as opposed to tutoring where the goals are kind of decided by somebody else. But when you're teaching, you get to decide what the goals are. Okay, gonna pass it back to you.
No, that's a really great point, and that's part of the responsibility too. But it's a joyful responsibility. It's something you get to help shape. And so Genis, tell us more about your teaching, what you taught.
Definitely, I feel like I agree with Karis as well, because like once the kids come in, it's like basically you have to teach them something that you're not really like, I guess, prepared for. So it's like sometimes the work is a little boring and whatnot, but like at New City we get to make our own lesson plan, so we can make it fun and we can make it actually something enjoyable, so that the kids don't have to feel bored or like they don't want to do the work at all. So yeah, we have the opportunity to basically like we have a little bit of freedom to basically expand our like, I guess, experience for the kids. So basically for the first portion of pods that I did was in around September to November. Around that time we did pods, and then I was in the online reading program for the winter. So it was a little bit different than what I was expecting. So from a tutor to an active teacher to a reading teacher, it was a little crazy. But basically, we also had to do lesson plans as well, and we had to make sure that the lesson plans corresponded with the theme. So we had a theme, I believe, every week. And basically, we would choose different type of books that the kids were interested in, but also making sure that it fit with the exact theme. So, I mean, you could probably guess that online isn't really the easiest thing in the world, especially with kids. So just making sure that they were really engaged in what they were doing, especially reading the books. We had to make sure that we chose books that would really in their interest. So we had a thing where we did in the beginning of online reading where we would have them choose their own books, and then we would choose extra books in the end so they would all fit with the theme of the week.
And just tell me, how old are these kids you're teaching?
The kids range from first, I believe, to second grade is the first portion, and then is it third graders to fifth graders? Am I right? Okay, great. So yeah, we had two portions. So the first class we had were the first to second graders. So they were the younger kids. So we'd have to choose their reading levels. We would have to choose books in their ranges. And then we would have a extra lesson plan, which would be for the third to the fifth graders, which would be another level range. So we would have to find the appropriate books for them as well.
So you're involved in that process of picking out books for them, yes?
Yes.
Wow. Karis, I want to ask you now, tell me again, explain a little bit more about how fandom figures into all this.
Yeah, that's a great question. So one thing that I think Genis said was that we were really focused on youth interests. And so the teens were kind of trained, if youth bring up something that they like, it also make space for youth to bring up things that they like and they care about. And then when they do that, remember it, hang on to it, and work it into the rest of the lessons that you plan. And so I would see teens would notice oh, this class likes Among Us. Is very, very popular. And then the teens would work it in to their upcoming lesson plans, and maybe they would pick out vocabulary words related to those things that the youth liked, or they would think about ways to engage them through those interests. So that was one thing. Another thing that we tried to do was have a writing component to the online reading program. So we put together, in collaboration with the Meaningful Writing life skills class that we could talk about a little bit more if we wanted to, we had a online reading program writing contest where we asked the youth to submit poems and fiction or fan fiction that they wanted to write, or kind of essays. And what the teens were doing, so I was training the ESL teachers, and they were working with the students on both reading, but then also writing. So they might read a poem and then support the students in writing a poem, or they might do a unit on graphic novels and then have the students write a comic. And a lot of times the youth interests would get taken up in those writing spaces. So we had a lot of superhero comics. I had a few superhero fan fictions submitted by students. And in our final literacy celebration, students were allowed to dress up as characters that they loved. And those could be characters from books, but really we just opened it up to all characters. So we had students dressing as Spider-Man, Elsa. We had a lot of Elsas, and that just made space for it not to be characters only exist in books and reading only exists in books, but more broader than that. We're interested in your engagement with stories wherever those stories are housed. And at our literacy celebration, we had a panel of teens who the youth could ask questions about, and we had questions where do you find stories to read? And then we had questions about book movie adaptations, kind of questions to ask them more about these more expansive literacy practices.
Fantastic. Josh, do you want to say something about the fandom aspect? I find it super interesting. If when I was a student, a teacher had asked me, what did I find interesting? What do I want to learn more about or read about? I would have thought they were crazy, and so maybe this is not unusual now, but I think it's really a very beautiful way to open up the classroom, make it more inclusive. And I'm curious to know how this sort of fits in with New City Kids, and also Sue, if you have something to say about this, whether this is a sort of new approach, or is this something you were aware of and you were just really happy to implement it, or has it sort of changed the way you're thinking about things now?
Yeah, I think there's something very special about being in a classroom with kids, even if it's virtual or in person, where all the kids are interested in the same kinds of books and are interested in the reading. I've seen how kids get excited for being in the class, being in the room, more than if I have to force something on them, or if I say, oh, let's read this book. There's something about uh, inclusivity and also community building that takes place, where kids feel a part of the learning process. They feel a part of what the information that they're able to read together. And so I feel that moving forward, seeing this happen all throughout this year, we want to continue to build on that, and have kids continue to pick out what they want to learn, what they want to read. And at least for Families for Literacy's program, we want to continue in maximizing what we've learned this year.
Fantastic. Yeah, it really strikes me that by asking the young people what they want to read about, it's valuing their own lives. It's saying, what you're interested in is interesting. Let's talk more about that, and using that as a mechanism for learning. Sue, do you want to say anything about this subject?
Yeah, so the idea of like picking your own book and what you want to read, it's actually been a part of our model in our after school center. So the way it works, that within a 45-minute block, a kid is expected to finish their homework. You can imagine some kids who are already doing a homework at their cafeteria as they're waiting to get picked up. So they're kind of just rushing to get it done. So by the time they get to New City, they're already done. So it's like, what do we do with these guys for the next 45 minutes? And that's what falls into our extra credit curriculum. So under extra credit, we give there are incentives and prizes given for how many books a kid reads during that time. But the thing is, you can't get to do extra credit unless you finish all your homework in advance. So the tutor will the kid will always say, I finished my homework, I'm done. We don't ever listen to that in the very beginning. Denise, like a tutor, she checks it, makes sure that their homework is done, she logs it, and then she's like, all right, here's your extra credit log, and now you can start it. So one of the extra credits is that they can actually read their books. And we have physical libraries in all of our sites, and which is great. But the thing is, I would say it's hard to kind of pick the book exactly when you see it in a physical library of in our sites. But now the game changer is that we have enough laptops for all the kids, and now we've learned to use a great platform like Epic. We can literally we can Google unicorn. Not Google, we can type in unicorn in the search. We can type in soccer. We can type in doctor. We can look for multicultural books. And in all those ways, we're able to find it so quickly with the right reading level. And we can preview it. And now kids are able to do that. And if anything, it logs how much the kid reads too. So in that way, us really adapting this technology in a way that we hadn't done before, even though we could have, but the pandemic kind of forced our hand. We are now equipped to do extra credit and giving the ownership for the kids to pick out their own book. It really allows us to do that better going forward. So I think if anything, we've learned to just bridge these things together, and now we're really set up for success in the fall. Yeah.
Fantastic. Karis, do you want to round us out with some concluding remarks? We have another film to show, don't we?
Yes, yeah. I wanted to show the participants just a film with some clips from the final literacy celebration so that you can see the youth engaging in things like picking out culturally relevant books, talking to librarians. We actually worked with the Jersey City Public Library to pick out culturally relevant books that would reflect the identities of the students in the program, and get them those books, and also connect them to resources for finding more books online. I do think that digital repositories have a lot of like they widen your access to texts that you can engage in, but also I think that youth have a lot of ways of finding those texts on their own. When we were doing our meaningful writing class and we were talking about fan fiction, I don't know about you, Sue, but like a lot of I'm always really struck by how many of teens are already reading and writing fan fiction kind of in their out of school lives, and how that just connects to writing fiction, writing in other meaningful ways. And so I wanted to end with just one little story that features Genis, actually. Genis kind of talked about this a little bit already, but in the meaningful writing class, something that we talked about a lot was getting your writing out there into larger communities and larger discourses. And something that was kind of shared in the whole class was, we are really anxious about this. We're really anxious to go into like a digital public and post something that we've written. In fact, a lot of students, Genis, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think a lot of them were even scared to share it in our small meaningful writing class. It was really hard to share their writing. And so something that we worked on was like gradually sharing with a partner, or at the end of the class, sharing with our whole class, maybe submitting your writing to the New City Kids community. But then this opportunity came up through Jersey City Together for Genis to write up kind of like a testimony about her school experience and read it in front of a political action to ask for more funding for Jersey City public schools. And so this was a gathering of 250 plus community members to come together and demand that various educational stakeholders like the superintendent and the school board and state leaders fix this really terrible funding problem that we've had for over 10 years. And so they wanted to have a youth like come and read something or say something about their experiences. So I asked Genis if she wanted to do it, and I knew that she really loves to write and she wanted to share her writing, and she said yes. And so Genis wrote this really compelling story about how she had lost various teachers, various science teachers, because of this funding crisis and how it affected her. And she shared it at the Jersey City Together event. And actually her testimony came up again and again throughout the action and was one of the real kind of stories that people came back to say like, yes, like we need to make sure that we have funding because like students losing their teachers is just terrible. And in the end, that action was successful and Jersey City is now fully funded for the first time in 10 years. So that was kind of this like, yeah, really beautiful, meaningful writing experience that Genis took from being kind of worried about reading her writing to being able to read her writing in a really big space and make a big change and do some advocacy work. So Genis, I was really proud of you for that.
Tell us about that experience, Genis. What was that like?
I was really, really nervous because it was like so many people there, and I was like, I hope I don't stutter or say anything wrong. But it felt really good to just basically say what I was experiencing. And it just felt good to be heard overall because Karis and me, we worked long hours on that writing piece to make sure everything was perfect and I got my point across. So I was really glad to work with Karis on that and show everybody like this is what's really happening to other teens as well, in high schools or even in middle school. So I felt like it was a really important cause to me, especially since I've been experiencing it for like a few years now because I keep having a whole bunch of substitutes. But it just felt really fun at the end to just share my story.
Very impressive. Very, very impressive. Karis, shall we show the film now?
Yeah, I think let's do it.
All right, let me share my screen. Sorry, didn't mean to start it over again. That was fantastic. Karis, tell us what that was.
So that was the end of year literacy celebration. That's actually the first time the online reading program met in person. Even after 4 iterations of design, that was the first time everyone was seeing each other in person. And what happened was the youth, they rotated through various literacy themed booths. So you saw one booth, they learned about library resources and they read a book with a librarian. In another booth, they got to pick out culturally relevant books that interested them. In another booth, they got to have a panel discussion with teens about the teens' literacy practices. In another booth, they got to make found poetry. So you saw a lot of them like gluing words together. That was the poetry, which they then entered into the contest. And then we had a photo booth where they got to celebrate their costumes and say thank you to the volunteers who read with them throughout the year.
And you were in there, weren't you?
Yes, I was Elsa, due to popular demand to have an Elsa to take pictures with.
Nice, really nice.
And David was the T-Rex, which was also in high demand.
Fantastic. So I just want to give you all the opportunity to just say a few last words about your work with Karis, about New City Kids, about these kinds of collaborations. Josh, would you like to start us off?
Sure. So I am incredibly grateful for Karis and her involvement with New City Kids in this last year. I believe that our students have incredibly benefited greatly with this partnership with Karis, and there is actual proof and data out there where we have done pre and post reading assessments on all of our children, and I believe the percentage is about 80 to 85% of our children have improved in their reading literacy level since being part of our reading program. So it just shows how effective the design and the partnership that we were able to create with Karis in this past year. And of course, having the teens involved, volunteers, it has been very, very equitable for our kids. And I would say that many of our kids would not have had this great benefit if they not have been part of this online reading program. And in many ways, not only in literacy, like I had mentioned earlier about their emotional health, physical health, spiritual health, social health as well. For the fact that at a year where there has been so much isolation, social isolation, many of our kids have felt so connected with other children, other adults, other staff. And so it's just been, it's what, with the pandemic creating such a dark, isolating time, we have been able to create something so beautiful through this program and really bring so much support, love, relief to the children, to the teens of this community, and just greatly grateful for Karis and her partnership.
Thank you, Josh. Sue, would you like to say a few final words for us?
Yeah, Josh touched upon it for the kids and the families. I'll specifically address it more for the teens. In a year where a lot of nonprofits and youth-focused programs kind of either unfortunately folded or had to severely adapt their models, where it was just a lot of limited engagement, we were actually able to expand our engagement, and it's kind of unprecedented in that way. We were able to give teens a larger platform so that they can be leaders in our program, but also give them, like Josh mentioned, that social community, which I would say our teens more and more really needed. And the way we kind of addressed their academics is by even opening up our building so that Monday through Friday, they can come in and do their online schooling from here. But by them already being in the building, that fostered just the culture and the environment of like, hey, just be at New City. And then they're able to then communicate better with their co-teachers, plan for lessons in person, but then even be able to teach their online reading class from like at our office. And just the ways that I think through Karis, we were able to better listen to the needs of the community and know who we're serving. It's like, all right, what are the things that people are asking for that we do? And yes, homework help would be great, but more importantly right now, kids need that social environment, as well as just a reminder to like continue to read more and read effectively. And it's all fell in line with kind of what we do already. So in that sense, yeah, the pandemic pushed us to the limits, but if anything, it allowed us to grow more as a program and being better listeners to who we serve. So yeah.
Great, yeah, unexpected outcomes from a terrible situation, positive outcomes, I should say. Genis, do you wanna say a few words just about your experience and maybe what you're looking forward to in the new year?
Definitely, Karis is amazing. Just putting that out there. But definitely, she's been really, really helpful and amazing support as well. She's really helped us with like everything that we've done so far with like writing and literacy has been really, really helpful to me, especially when it comes to like college applications in the near future. So definitely, more life skills with Karis. Just putting that out there. I would love for everybody else to just get a feel of what that is like, because I know it was only limited to a few people. I feel like we should maybe make the club like more long term, just like we do like tutoring sessions for the teens as well. I feel like having like a little writing club where we could maybe come in on certain days would be really, really fun as well. But Karis, thank you for real overall. You've been such a great help, especially with helping me with my writing. I feel like writing to me has been a stress reliever. So definitely helped me more with these skills. So thank you.
I just wanted to say I'm so grateful for New City Kids. Like this partnership only worked because they like threw open their doors and they really wanted to collaborate together. And when I said what my interests were, really they just threw back like, here are all the programs we have where you could be involved. And so I think finding the philosophical alignment, but then also having this like really open partnership is really important. Thank you guys. I really loved working with you all this year.
What a great project. What a great series of projects. Fantastic. Thank you all so much. I want to thank you, Karis, for bringing this event to the center. I'm really pleased that we could give you a platform for your work. And I want to thank you, Josh, Sue, and Genis for giving up your time and coming and talking to us about your work today. And I wish you all the very best going forward with that work. I also want to thank Kyla Bowen and Denny Valentine for their support and help behind the scenes of this event and the center's operations generally. Again, thank you everyone for watching today, and take care.